Hello, it's me. How are you? All right, so this is a very long time coming. Not even going to go into all of the stuff that I've had to deal with. So, at any rate, here I am again. And so, what I'm doing today is a video for some homework that I had to do for my Witchcraft 101 or Knowing Your Craft 101. I can't remember what the class is. She's going to hurt me. Anyway, so this is my video on that homework. I did post on Facebook um, what I'm going to the entirety of what I'm going to do. I'm just going to read what I wrote. I'm going to read it from Facebook on my phone because my monitor, if you can't tell, I sort of moved, and so I have my monitor up above my my computer, um, and that's a long story too. Suffice it to say, my laptop monitor is broken. It doesn't work. So in order for me to do anything, I have to plug it into my TV. But that's neither here nor there. It's not really what I'm here for. What I'm here for is to talk about a little bit of history of witchcraft. And that history that I chose was the Salem witch trials. Now, well, I'll just read what I wrote. And so it's going to be a little different because I'm going to try to put my phone up here just below the camera so that I can kind of keep track of what I'm saying, as well as actually look into the camera once in a while. So that's about it. So let's get started, shall we? This is going to be a brief history of witchcraft, the Salem witch trials. So now we all know the story. Several girls in Salem Village, it's now called Danvers, accused three women of bewitching them. From those three, many men, women, and children were also accused. In the end, 19 people were hanged and one was crushed to death. The hysteria spread through Massachusetts. And it wasn't just limited to the tiny agricultural community of Salem Village. The witch trials were only stopped when first the Reverend George Burroughs was hanged after he recited the Lord's Prayer. And then second, Governor Phipps's own wife, Mary, was accused. We have many stories from the Salem Village and the witch trials from 1692. Some of them are fun, like Hocus Pocus, and some are made into parables to punctuate historical events, like The Crucible was written for the Red Scare in the 50s. Still others are full of magic and even romanticized, and those are like Salem or Practical Magic. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem the reality was quite as romantic and entertaining as all that. So here's a little history. In February of 1692, the daughter and the niece of the Reverend Samuel Parris, Betty Parris and Abigail Williams, respectively, began having spasms, screaming, and hallucinations. This after spending months with their friends listening to the Reverend's slave from Barbados, Tituba, tell fantastic stories of mysticism and divination, even showing them how to read signs by dropping an egg white into a glass of water. The girls were 9, Betty, and 12, Abigail. Their friends ranged in age from 12 to 19. And it soon worked out that one of the more prolific accusers was, Ann Putnam Jr., a 12-year-old within the group. Now, let's see, where was I? To many historians, it seems the bulk of the hysteria based on Ann Putnam's involvement was more about a local feud between certain families and the sides that were taken by those within the village and without. Others credit it with the religious fanaticism of the Puritans in Massachusetts and their need to create a theocratic society outside of both the Church of England and the papacy. Still others point at the rye and barley fungus ergot that, when devoured, causes spasms, hallucinations, vomiting, and outbursts, eventually killing the victim. Frankly, it makes so much sense to me to put all of those together, um, and to really include all of the factors, because when you're looking at the human animal, it is very easy to reflect on the history and its bloody stories and see that there is a pattern of us versus them mentality. The people of Salem Village had the reputation from their neighbors as being a contrary and argumentative lot. There were many disputes over land borders, grazing rights, and even religion. And the politics of the 1600s in the colonies and England was incredibly convoluted and a bit intricate to get into this little treatise. However, suffice it to say that King James II and King William and Queen Mary, who came in after James was deposed, they did not help matters. Entirely wonderful bout into history if you want to go and look it up. And there's a lot of political intrigue between the Catholic and Protestant royals of the time, and it really should be studied. In February of 1692, Sir William Phips was placed as governor of Massachusetts by King William, and then a new charter was made for the province of Massachusetts. He created, Governor Phips created the special court of oyer to hear and terminer to determine, to deal with all the imprisoned, including those jailed for accusations of witchcraft. The special court was established just a few months after the first of the accusations had taken place. Now, as I said, the original accusers were the daughter and the niece of Samuel Parris. Parris, it seems, was a rather controversial choice in ministers for the villagers. They had troubles keeping ministers until Reverend Parris came along. I think it's rather intriguing, actually, that one of the former ministers, George Burroughs, was one of the last men to be hanged for witchcraft. He was also the one who recited the Lord's Prayer, and many thought, and rightly so, that they were hanging an innocent man, based solely on the fact that it was a sign of a witch or wizard to be unable to recite the prayer. Samuel Parris' appointment was met by a split in the community for his appointment. Some applauded it, and others were against it. And it seems, too, that the good Reverend did not help his cause at all by delaying his acceptance to the appointment. Once appointed, however, he began to openly chastise the parishioners by ordering them to suffer public penance for even the smallest of infractions. Now, I haven't verified this, but I'm positive that if there are any records, something tells me that those members who were in fact in good standing with the congregation, but yet publicly chastised, were probably some of those who opposed his appointment. But that's just my own little guess. Now we're going to come into some names that I think everyone will recognize. Cotton Mather, a minister in Boston, was rather fascinated by witchcraft. He was both intrigued and disgusted by it. He was also cautious about the methods by which the judges used during the trials. He was attempting to encourage less medieval methods, I guess, than allowing spectral evidence. Now, spectral evidence was that which only the accuser could see. If the specter of the witch appeared to the accuser, then that was enough evidence for the court. And I'm sure you see the fallacy in that line of gathering evidence and how obvious that is. Cotton Mather, however, did use spectral evidence in the trial of Goodwife Goody Ann Glover in Boston 4 years previous. And there is a rather interesting story in the trial and death of Goody Glover. But suffice to say that many of those who knew her stated that she was a Catholic Irish woman, and as far as they could tell, she never dabbled in witchcraft. However, they did find many rudimentary dolls in her home, and she had testified that she prayed to many spirits, something akin to praying to the saints. Because she was poor, it is assumed now that she made dolls to represent those saints. Now back to February 1692. Just 4 years after Goody Glover's death, Betty and Abigail first pointed the finger at Tituba and also then to Sarah Good, the local homeless beggar, and Sarah Osborne, the woman who had remarried, and it was her indentured servant who she married. The three women were pretty much outcasts in Salem Village. Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne both proclaimed their innocence, and yet they were still hanged. Tituba, however, confessed. She, in turn, sent accusations toward other members of the community. This, too, is where Ann Putnam and the 17-year-old Elizabeth Hubbard also came in. They were as well instrumental in what happened next. The trials. Ann Putnam Jr. was significant because she was the daughter of one of the two feuding families. The other family was the Porters, and they were essentially a polarizing force within Salem Village. Most of those to whom Anne pointed the finger were members of the Porter family or their supporters. And Sarah Good pretty much was doomed from the beginning anyway, because she was poor, she was homeless, she was a beggar, and she did not attend church, which was completely anathema to the citizenry of Salem Village. Sarah Osborne also did not attend church, and she was trying to control her son's inheritance, and a woman in charge of money was not to be had in puritanical Massachusetts society. So after being interrogated for several days, Tituba and the Sarahs were jailed on March 1st, 1692. And in March, by Tituba and the four girls, Martha Corey, Sarah Good's daughter Dorothy, and Rebecca Nurse were accused of witchcraft, as well as Rachel Clinton in Ipswich. Now, it should be noted here that Clinton and many others who were arrested in Massachusetts are completely unrelated with the goings-on in Salem Village. So within the entire colony, or within Massachusetts totally, there were many different pockets where this was all going on. Salem just happens to be the one we know. And that was my next point here. While it is the most discussed, it is not the only witch hunt that occurred at the time in New England. Neither was it proprietary to Massachusetts and the colonies of the day. Remember that the Malleus Maleficorum, the witch's hammer, was written circa 1498, and it was used as a practical guide for witch hunters throughout Europe for almost 200 years. In that time, the estimate is about 80,000 people who were put to death on suspicion of witchcraft. Also, it should be noted that burning at the stake was not ever practiced here in the New World. In fact, the last witch burning occurred almost 100 years before the Salem witch trials. The method of killing a witch was typically hanging, although drowning happened regularly. And that's due to the test of a witch with water. They would throw the accused into a pond or lake or river, and if they floated, they were witches, and if they sunk, they were not. And unfortunately, every accused person, guilty or not, would drown. And I just saw this today, because I wondered why would that make a difference? Well, if it's a witch, then the water wants to get rid of that evil, so it's pushing it up and making him float. And I thought, okay, well, I guess that makes sense in a medieval time. Glad that's not happening today. But anyway, I digress. Back to Salem Village. Dorothy Goods, Sarah Goods' daughter, was only 4 years old when she was accused of being a witch and faced trial. Martha Corey was 71. She and Rebecca Nurse were both covenanted and upstanding members of church society within Salem Village. And it was a source of concern for everyone when those two were accused, because it meant that no one could know who had signed the devil's book and made a pact with him to practice witchcraft. So based on my brief yet somewhat in-depth look at the Salem witch trials, the four girls, Betty, Abigail, Anne, and Elizabeth, were friends, and it seems Elizabeth's and Anne's parents must have supported the appointment of Samuel Parris. Most of they who were accused were opposed originally to it. And Rebecca Nurse's sister, Sarah Cloyce, and Elizabeth Proctor were arrested in April. John Proctor completely objected to his wife's arrest, and during her trial, he was arrested. Within a week of Martha Corey's arrest, Giles Corey, the last person in this chapter of horrific deaths, was arrested for his objections to his wife Martha being accused and arrested. Mary Warren, a Proctor family servant and one-time accuser, was arrested, as were Abigail Hobbs, Deliverance Hobbs, Abigail's stepmother, and Bridget Bishop. Mary, Abigail, and Deliverance all confessed and began naming names, while Bridget did neither. Bridget Bishop was a strange duck by Puritan terms. She wore odd costumes and black, which made me wonder because I thought they all wore black, but I could be mistaken. And she was also a successful businesswoman who had been married a few times. Hers was the first conviction on June 2nd, 1692. The following day, Rebecca Nurse and John Willard went before the grand jury, and their accusations were endorsed, but they did not go to trial yet. Bishop was hanged on June 10th, 1692. Now, in Salem Village, there were 4 execution dates. June 10th, 1692 was Bridget Bishop. July 19th, 1692 was Sarah Good, Rebecca Nurse, Savannah Martin, Elizabeth Howe, and Sarah Wiles. August 19th, 1692, Martha Carrier, John Willard, George Burroughs, George Jacobs Sr., and John Proctor were all hanged. September 22nd, 1692, Mary Easty, Martha Corey, Anne Pudieter, Samuel Wardwell, Mary Parker, Alice Parker, Wilmot Red, and Margaret Scott. Now, Elizabeth Parker, Abigail Faulkner, and several others were given a temporary reprieve because they were pregnant, and a few others were never carried out. Now, the most interesting story in all of this is the final death, and that is of Giles Corey. He never pleaded. He never pleaded guilty or not guilty. Instead, he suffered the, oh God, it's French. Forget it. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. The translation, however, is strong and harsh punishment, in which the victim is stripped naked, a board is laid on top of him, and heavy rocks are placed on top of that. The accuser either confesses or is crushed by the weight. Corey's torture began on September 19, 1692, and ended 2 days later. His final words were, "more weight," although some say it was "more rocks," while still other accounts say, "curse you and all of Salem." But anyway, in the year of hysteria, 14 women and 5 men were hanged for witchcraft. And then Giles Corey was crushed to death. The women endured the most humiliating examinations, being stripped naked in front of the entire town in search for the devil's teat, which was a mark, a mole, or some sort of blemish that would be used to suckle the demon. They were made to urinate in a cup, and the urine was made into a cake that was given to a dog. Now, if the dog showed signs of the victims of the witches, then they were guilty of witchcraft, and they died. They spared the dogs, however. Just wanted to let you know that the dogs were all spared. Everyone pleaded innocent. Everyone who pleaded innocent were hanged or imprisoned. All those who confessed were set free, except for Tituba, who was resold to another master. It wasn't until 1957 that every one of the accused and their families were exonerated for those horrific crime of witchcraft. Now, they did do something back in the 1700s, early 1700s. After all of this had calmed down, they did give lands back to some of them who had family that were hanged or that type of thing, but not everyone. Not until 1957. The Salem witch trials were an injustice. They were the last well-known, as the practice had been waning for almost a century in Europe. The false accusations of those who practiced witchcraft carried on for a while in the colonies. And it is at this point, toward the end of all of this, that I'd like to point out a couple of things. The term witch hunt connotes the idea of mass hysteria and broad brushing those others, those who are different and who do not believe as we do. Typically, the accusations are false. one could not relegate the Holocaust to a witch hunt, as the ones thrown into Auschwitz were in fact Jewish, gay, Catholic, and their sympathizers. No, the Holocaust was a genocide. So there's a difference, and it's a huge difference. Um, However, the McCarthy era Red Scare, in which many people were blacklisted across the country for being communists, that was a witch hunt. When one looks at the history of the Red Scare, Lucille Ball, Vivian Leigh, and many others were blacklisted from Hollywood. It was a hysteria in America. Many local people in communities across the nation were shunned by their neighbors. Now, granted, they weren't hung, um, but they may as well have been. Many never made it back to where they were before McCarthy began his witch hunt. And when I hear the term being used today, I cringe, because it's being used by the wrong people. It is being used by those who are, in fact, conducting a witch hunt. The term is being used to gaslight the citizenry of our nation, especially given the fact that it is the administration and others who are targeting anyone who has brown skin as thieves, thugs, and drug outlaws. But again, I digress. This is not to be political. However, I did want to ensure that we are aware of the atrocities actually associated with witch hunts. They're about hysteria, they're about fanaticism, oppression, and the vilification of the others. So, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. It's a very small glance into just a little bit of history of witchcraft. And do I believe that any of those who were accused in the 1692 or before, or even after, were practitioners? Honestly, I don't know, but and maybe we'll never know, but the fact remains that even if they were practitioners, that didn't warrant more than 80,000 people dying by torture just because someone said they were a witch. And I do have a whole lot more to say, and I know you know I do. But I'm going to leave it at that for now. So I don't know how I'm going to edit this. I don't know if I'm going to throw pictures up. I don't know if I'm going to get rid of my picture altogether because I don't like it. However I edit this, it should be up. It should be up. Let's see. I guess today is the 26th, so it should be up tomorrow, the 27th, on my YouTube channel. I'll post it on my class page on Facebook. I'll post it on my page on Facebook, and so that's it for now. So I hope you all enjoyed this, maybe even learned something, or you just enjoyed me rambling. I don't care. So at any rate, I am going to sign off for now. Merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again.